Welcome to our next video, which explains how to approach the New Testament letters. This is part of our Bible reading plan with Anthem Church, and today's video comes from a discussion that I led a few years ago, and it's edited to give you the essential background information to better understand these foundational books in the Bible. So let's get started.
But before we jump into the specific books, I want to just kind of talk about the New Testament letters and just how to understand them. And so with the conclusion of Luke Acts, after we've been identifying with the disciples and they witnessed Jesus firsthand and they testified of his life-changing work. And so we're trusting in Jesus to work through us as he did through them. And it's so that the story of Jesus continues through us. We are his spirit-empowered followers. And yet, like his disciples, we're going to have questions as we're seeking to find meaning and purpose in response to the biblical story, like we read about this last year. Now, fortunately, leaders of the early church preserved these letters to instruct today's church in how to grow spiritually, to care for each other, and to live on mission. So really, we see these letters as a theological blueprint. Theological just means our view of God. So it's a way for us to get a really concise understanding of what it means to believe in Jesus. And so it gives us this theological blueprint to build upon the foundation of the beliefs of the early church. And not only for us, but also for future followers after us who, like us, seek greater clarity, seek insights into what it means to live out a gospel-centered, spirit-empowered life. And so when we're looking at these letters, they're written by the original apostles. And so these apostles were appointed by Jesus to spread the good news about the kingdom. And so we're getting it from the source. And when they wrote these letters, though, they wrote it to Jesus followers living in different cities around the Roman world. So as we're reading these letters, it's like we're going into the mailbox of our neighbor and reading through their mail. And so that means there's a lot of background information that's assumed and it's not mentioned. And so that's important for us to understand so that we make as accurate an interpretation as possible about the conclusions that we're making about God. And so before we talk about Paul's letters, I just want to briefly highlight just three aspects of these letters that we just need to keep in mind as we read them. And so the first one is to understand how the letters fit into the larger storyline of the Bible. So we've been reading through the story of the Bible, but I think it's for many people kind of new to especially read through the Old Testament. I know many churches in the US, especially on Sunday when they're teaching sermons, almost entirely teach on the New Testament letters. And it's largely because they're straightforward. They use concise, plain language to explain our Christian beliefs about God. So it makes sense. Yet the letters are a commentary on the biblical story. And so we need to understand how it fits in. And the writers of these letters assume the reader understands the Old Testament stories and the life of Jesus revealed in the Gospels, which is what we just finished. And so as we're reading through the New Testament letters, just examine what they're saying in light of what we just read through in the Old Testament and the Gospels, and even cross-reference. Sometimes it'll be a direct quote, and it's good to kind of read it in the original context of the Old Testament or in the Gospel as we understand how it relates to the letter that's being written. Now, the second thing is to understand the culture of the Roman Empire in the first century. That's the context that it was written in. So Rome ruled all of these territories around the Mediterranean Sea by enslaving their enemies and imposing heavy taxes upon them, which the emperor and kind of his cohorts really controlled to maintain social order. So when we're understanding the audience that the letters were written to, most of the people lived in fear. They didn't have much money. They didn't have stability. And I think especially for women, slaves, children, and the poor, they were even treated as inferior. So that's what they're speaking into. So they're reacting to that cultural understanding of these people. And so Roman culture had a very clear hierarchy, valuing men from important families with money and education to move ahead in society. And so it's just good for us to understand that, because as the church, everyone is treated with love and equal dignity, which for the church back then, that would threaten the social order of Rome. So it's that context that these letters were written. It's just good to know that there's a bit of a countercultural messaging that's breaking down barriers between people, that's kind of written in between the lines of the letters. Now, the third thing and the last thing to know is to know the problem each author was addressing by their letter. So each letter has some specific issues that the author heard about and was prompted to write and speak into. So authors like Paul and Peter and John and Jude, they're challenging the views that are held by this church. And they're trying to speak into the situation. What I love is often you'll see that it's using the lens of the person and work of Jesus to help them understand the reason why they're speaking into these situations. So when we're reading through these letters, we gain wisdom how the good news of Jesus, his person and work, can challenge us and transform our perspective about living out our faith in the 21st century. So, if this is something that you want to learn more about, the last time that we met, we talked about Bible 103, how to interpret direct discourse in the Bible. That's the letters. That's the style that they're written in. And so I'd encourage you to watch these. It's recorded, and it's just going to give you a consistent approach to interpreting the letters. I just say, pick what can help you get a little bit more out of your reading of the Bible. But there's a lot there that you can reference in the future.